Could a loving husband really kill his wife with animal tranquilizers, then hide her body for over 3 years while maintaining his innocence? The mountain town of Evergreen Ridge, Colorado, seemed like paradise to most visitors. Nestled between towering peaks and pristine forests, it was the kind of place where neighbors waved from their porches and children rode their bikes until the streetlights came on. For Celeste Harmon, a 49-year-old mother of 2 teenage daughters, it was home. On the surface, Celeste appeared to have it all. She lived in a sprawling ranch-style house with her husband of over 2 decades, Garrett Harmon, a successful landscaping contractor who also operated a small deer farm on their property. The couple's daughters, Mackenzie and Brooke, were thriving in high school, Mackenzie excelling in volleyball while Brooke pursued her passion for photography. But beneath the veneer of this picture-perfect family lay cracks that few people could see. Celeste had been struggling in her marriage for years. Those closest to her knew that she and Garrett had grown distant, their conversations reduced to logistics about the girls' schedules and household responsibilities. Friends would later reveal that Celeste had confided in them about feeling trapped, about dreams of a different life that seemed increasingly out of reach. What made Celeste's situation particularly heartbreaking was her vibrant spirit. Despite her marital troubles, she threw herself into being the best mother possible. She attended every volleyball game, helped with homework late into the night, and made sure her daughters never wanted for emotional support. Her love for fitness was legendary among her friends. She could be found mountain biking the challenging trails around Evergreen Ridge most mornings, her blonde hair catching the early sunlight as she pushed herself up steep inclines that would leave most people gasping. She was the strongest person I knew, her best friend, Dana Mitchell, would later tell investigators through tears. Not just physically, but emotionally. She was fighting for something better for herself and her girls. But on Mother's Day 2020, that fight would come to a devastating end.
Real quick, stats show that about 95% of viewers watching our videos aren't subscribed yet. If you're enjoying this story, take a second to subscribe. It helps the channel grow and brings more stories like this to you and others who need them. Let's keep going.
May 10th, 2020, Mother's Day, dawned crisp and clear in Evergreen Ridge. For Celeste, it started like any other day. She woke early, around 5:30 a.m., and prepared for her morning bike ride. It was a ritual she rarely missed, even on holidays. The trails provided her with solitude, a chance to think and plan, away from the tensions that had become constant in her home. Garrett would later tell investigators that he watched his wife prepare for her ride that morning. According to his account, they exchanged pleasantries about the beautiful weather, and she mentioned wanting to tackle the challenging wildflower trail that wound through the national forest adjacent to their property. He claimed he was planning to do some work in his landscaping business that day, despite it being a holiday. "She kissed me goodbye," Garrett would tell police during his first interview. "Said she'd be back by noon. That was the last time I saw her." But Celeste never came home. As the afternoon stretched on and the sun began its descent behind the mountains, Mackenzie and Brooke grew increasingly worried. Their mother was never late, especially not on Mother's Day. They had planned a special dinner, complete with homemade cards and a photo album they'd been secretly working on for weeks. By 6 p.m., panic had set in. Garrett seemed oddly calm, suggesting that maybe Celeste had decided to extend her ride or visit a friend. But the girls knew better. Their mother would never leave them wondering, never miss Mother's Day dinner without calling. It was Brooke who finally called 911 at 6:47 p.m. "My mom went on a bike ride this morning and she hasn't come back," the 16-year-old said, her voice trembling. "She would never do this. Something's wrong." Within hours, Evergreen Ridge transformed into a staging ground for one of the largest search operations in the county's history. Sheriff's deputies, search and rescue teams, and dozens of volunteers combed the mountainous terrain, following every trail, checking every ravine. The search focused initially on the wildflower trail, where Garrett said Celeste had planned to ride. But as investigators examined the area more closely, something didn't add up. Celeste's bike was discovered near the trailhead, but it was positioned in a way that suggested it had been placed there rather than abandoned by someone in distress. "The bike was too clean," recalled Detective Sarah Chun, who would become the lead investigator on the case. "If someone had been in an accident or attacked while riding, you'd expect to see signs of struggle, maybe damage to the bike. But this looked staged." As the search expanded, helicopters with thermal imaging equipment swept the rugged landscape. Volunteer searchers, many of them Celeste's friends and neighbors, called her name until their voices were hoarse. The community rallied in a way that showcased the best of small-town America. Local restaurants donated food for the search teams, businesses closed so employees could join the effort, and social media campaigns spread Celeste's photo far beyond Colorado's borders. But as days turned into weeks, hope began to fade. The terrain around Evergreen Ridge was unforgiving, filled with deep canyons, swift-moving streams swollen with snowmelt, and dense forests where a person could disappear without a trace. All the while, Garrett appeared to be the grieving husband, pleading publicly for his wife's safe return. He gave interviews to local news stations, his voice breaking as he spoke about his love for Celeste and his desperate hope that she would come home to their daughters. "Celeste is my everything," he said during one particularly emotional television appearance. "She's the heart of our family. I just want her back. The girls need their mom." But behind the scenes, investigators were beginning to develop serious doubts about Garrett's version of events. As the investigation deepened, a troubling picture began to emerge. Neighbors reported seeing Garrett loading his truck with what appeared to be landscaping equipment on the morning of May 10th, but no one could remember seeing him actually working on any job sites that day. His business records showed no scheduled appointments for Mother's Day. More damning was the discovery of Celeste's phone activity. Digital forensics experts found that her device had been used to send text messages hours after she had supposedly left for her bike ride. The messages were uncharacteristic, formal and brief, unlike Celeste's usual warm, conversational style. "The texts felt wrong," explained Mackenzie during a later interview. "Mom always used lots of emojis and wrote long messages. These were like cold, not like her at all." Phone records also revealed something else disturbing. Garrett's phone had been in airplane mode for several hours on May 10th, from approximately 9 a.m. to 2 p.m. When investigators asked him about this, he claimed he had been having battery problems and had turned the phone off to conserve power. But the most chilling discovery came when investigators obtained a warrant to search the Harmon property. In Garrett's workshop, they found something that would change the entire trajectory of the case: a tranquilizer dart gun and a supply of BAM, a powerful combination of butorphanol, azaparone, and medetomidine used to sedate large animals. Garrett readily admitted to owning the equipment, explaining that he used it to tranquilize deer on his small farm when they needed veterinary care. He even provided receipts showing his purchase of the BM compound. What he couldn't explain was why the dart gun appeared to have been recently cleaned and oiled, or why one of his darts was missing from the supply he kept in a locked cabinet. "I always keep my equipment clean and maintained," Garrett told investigators. "And I'm not sure about the missing dart. Maybe I miscounted." As the investigation progressed, more disturbing details emerged about the Harmons' marriage. Friends and family members, initially reluctant to speak ill of Garrett, began to share their concerns. Several people reported that Celeste had mentioned feeling controlled and isolated. Garrett had gradually discouraged her friendships, often making her feel guilty for spending time away from home. "He was very charming, very convincing," recalled Dana Mitchell. "But over the years, I noticed how Celeste seemed to shrink around him. She was always apologizing for things that weren't her fault, always worried about making him angry." Financial records revealed another troubling pattern. Garrett had been secretly struggling with debt, his landscaping business hemorrhaging money despite his claims of success. Insurance policies on Celeste's life totaled nearly $500,000, policies that Garrett had increased just months before her disappearance. On May 5th, 2021, nearly a year after Celeste's disappearance, sheriff's deputies arrived at Garrett Harmon's door with an arrest warrant. The charges were devastating: first-degree murder, tampering with physical evidence, and attempting to influence a public servant. The arrest sent shockwaves through Evergreen Ridge. Despite the growing evidence against him, many residents had held on to hope that Garrett was innocent, that there was some other explanation for his wife's disappearance. Garrett maintained his innocence from the moment of his arrest. His defense attorney, Margaret Walsh, argued that the evidence was circumstantial, that prosecutors were rushing to judgment in a case driven more by emotion than facts. "My client is a grieving widower who has been railroaded by an investigation that decided he was guilty from day one," Walsh said during a press conference. "The prosecution has no body, no definitive proof of death, and no direct evidence linking Garrett to any crime." The case seemed destined for trial, but then something unprecedented happened. In April 2022, just days before jury selection was to begin, prosecutors made a stunning announcement. They were dropping all charges against Garrett. The reason? Prosecutorial misconduct. An investigation revealed that the district attorney's office had failed to turn over crucial evidence to the defense team, violating Garrett's constitutional rights. The judge had no choice but to dismiss the case, though he made it clear that charges could be refiled if new evidence emerged. Garrett walked free, but his victory was hollow. The community's trust in him was shattered, and his daughters, now young adults, had begun to question everything they thought they knew about their father. For more than 2 years after the charges were dropped, the case of Celeste Harmon's disappearance languished. Garrett attempted to rebuild his life, filing a lawsuit against the county for what he claimed was malicious prosecution. He moved away from Evergreen Ridge, unable to bear the stares and whispers of former neighbors who still believed he was guilty. Mackenzie and Brooke struggled to navigate their complex feelings about their father. They wanted to believe in his innocence, but too many questions remained unanswered. Their relationship with Garrett became strained, marked by long silences and careful conversations that avoided the subject of their mother. "It's like living in limbo," Brooke would later say. "Part of you wants to grieve and move on, but how can you when you don't know what really happened? When the person you're supposed to trust most in the world might be the one who took your mom away." The investigation, meanwhile, continued quietly. Detective Chen and her team never stopped looking for Celeste, following up on tips, analyzing evidence, and waiting for the breakthrough they knew would eventually come. That breakthrough came on September 22, 2023, in the most unexpected way. A group of hunters, exploring a remote area of the Roosevelt National Forest about 50 miles from Evergreen Ridge, stumbled upon what appeared to be human remains partially buried beneath fallen logs and forest debris. The location was so remote that it was accessible only by foot or ATV, in an area that searchers had never thoroughly explored during the initial investigation. Within hours, the site was secured by law enforcement. The remains were carefully excavated and transported to the state medical examiner's office for analysis. DNA testing confirmed what investigators and Celeste's family had feared. The remains were those of Celeste Harmon. The discovery brought a mixture of heartbreak and relief to Celeste's daughters. Finally, they had answers. Their mother wasn't missing anymore. She was gone, and they could begin the process of truly grieving her loss. But the discovery of Celeste's remains also reignited the investigation. The medical examiner's office began the painstaking process of determining how she had died and whether there was any evidence that could point to her killer. The autopsy results, released in April 2024, were damning. Despite the advanced decomposition of the remains, forensic experts were able to make several crucial determinations. Most importantly, they found traces of the same BM compound that had been found in Garrett's workshop: butorphanol, azaparone, and medetomidine. The presence of these animal tranquilizers in Celeste's system was the smoking gun investigators had been waiting for. According to toxicology experts, the concentration of drugs in her remains was sufficient to cause unconsciousness and death, especially in someone of Celeste's size and weight. "This is not something that would happen accidentally," explained Dr. Lisa Rodriguez, the forensic pathologist who conducted the autopsy. "These drugs are not found in nature, and they're not used in human medicine. The only way they could have entered Mrs. Harmon's system is if they were deliberately administered." The medical examiner officially ruled Celeste's death a homicide of undetermined means, citing the presence of the animal tranquilizers as evidence of foul play. Armed with this new evidence, prosecutors began building a new case against Garrett. They meticulously reviewed every aspect of the original investigation, strengthening weak points and gathering additional evidence that had emerged in the 3 years since Celeste's body was found. The new investigation revealed additional details that painted an even clearer picture of what had happened to Celeste. Investigators discovered that Garrett had made several unexplained trips to remote areas in the days following his wife's disappearance, using back roads and avoiding highways with traffic cameras. Cell phone data showed that his phone had pinged towers near the area where Celeste's body was eventually found, contradicting his claims that he had been working near home during the time she went missing. Perhaps most tellingly, investigators found evidence that Garrett had researched the effects of animal tranquilizers on humans in the weeks before Celeste's disappearance. Browser history from his computer showed searches for terms like BM effects on humans and how much tranquilizer to sedate person. "It shows premeditation," explained Detective Chin. "This wasn't a crime of passion or a domestic dispute that got out of hand. This was planned, calculated murder." On June 20th, 2025, more than 5 years after Celeste Harmon vanished on that Mother's Day morning, justice finally began to take its course. A grand jury handed down a new indictment against Garrett Harmon, charging him with first-degree murder in his wife's death. This time, prosecutors were confident they had built an ironclad case. The evidence was overwhelming. The animal tranquilizers found in Celeste's system, Garrett's exclusive access to those drugs in the region, his suspicious behavior in the days following her disappearance, and the web of lies he had told investigators. Garrett was arrested at his new home in Arizona, where he had been living quietly under his real name, apparently confident that he would never be charged again. The arrest was swift and without incident, a stark contrast to the dramatic life he had been living while his wife's body lay hidden in the Colorado wilderness. As news of the arrest spread, Celeste's daughters issued a statement through their attorney. Today marks an important step toward justice for our mother. While nothing can bring her back, we hope that holding her killer accountable will help us find some measure of peace. We want to thank all the investigators, prosecutors, and community members who never gave up on finding the truth. Our mother was a beautiful, loving person who deserved so much better than the fate that befell her. The arrest of Garrett Harmon sent ripples through Evergreen Ridge and beyond. For years, the community had been divided, some believing in Garrett's innocence, others convinced of his guilt. The new charges, backed by solid scientific evidence, finally provided the closure that so many had been seeking. The case also highlighted important issues about domestic violence and the warning signs that friends and family members had missed or dismissed. Celeste's story became a catalyst for conversations about recognizing and responding to controlling behavior in relationships. Celeste's death wasn't just a random act of violence, said domestic violence advocate Jennifer Torres. It was the ultimate expression of control by someone who couldn't bear the thought of losing power over another person. Her story reminds us that domestic violence can happen to anyone in any community, and that we all have a responsibility to watch out for each other. The Wildflower Trail, where Celeste's bike was found, has become an unofficial memorial. Runners, hikers, and cyclists often stop to leave flowers or say a quiet prayer for a woman whose love of the outdoors ultimately became part of the story of her death. As this story is being written, Garrett Harmon sits in jail awaiting trial. His new legal team maintains his innocence, arguing that the evidence against him is still circumstantial and that prosecutors are trying to retry the same case that was previously dismissed. But legal experts believe this time will be different. The discovery of Celeste's body and the toxicology evidence have fundamentally changed the case. What was once a missing person investigation built on suspicion and circumstantial evidence is now a murder case with hard scientific proof of foul play. The presence of those animal tranquilizers is devastating evidence, explained criminal defense attorney Michael Harrison, who is not involved in the case. It's very difficult to argue that there's an innocent explanation for how those drugs got into the victim's system when the defendant was the only person in the area with access to them. The trial is expected to be a media sensation, drawing attention from true crime enthusiasts and legal observers across the country. For Celeste's daughters, it represents the final chapter in a nightmare that began more than 5 years ago on what should have been a day of celebration. Celeste Harmon's story is one of tragedy and loss, but it's also one of persistence and the power of truth. Her case demonstrates that justice, while sometimes delayed, can still be achieved through the dedication of investigators who refuse to give up and the strength of family members who never stop seeking answers. In Evergreen Ridge, Celeste is remembered not as a victim, but as a loving mother who fought for her children's happiness even in the face of her own struggles. Her daughters have grown into strong, independent women who carry their mother's spirit with them. They've established a scholarship fund in Celeste's name to help other young women pursue their dreams, just as their mother had encouraged them to do. The question that opened this story, could a loving husband really kill his wife with animal tranquilizers and hide her body for years while maintaining his innocence, has been answered. The evidence suggests that someone who appeared to be a grieving widower was actually a calculating killer who used his knowledge of animal sedatives to commit the perfect crime. But perfect crimes don't exist. Eventually, the truth emerges and justice finds its way. For Celeste Harmon, that justice came too late to save her life, but not too late to honor her memory and ensure that her killer faces the consequences of his actions. As the legal proceedings continue, one thing remains certain: Celeste Harmon will never be forgotten. Her story will serve as a reminder that domestic violence can lurk behind the most ordinary facades, and that communities must remain vigilant in protecting their most vulnerable members. The mountain trails around Evergreen Ridge still echo with the memory of a woman who loved the outdoors, who cherished her daughters above all else, and who deserved so much better than the fate that befell her on that Mother's Day morning in 2020. Her legacy lives on in the pursuit of justice and in the determination to ensure that her story helps prevent other tragedies. The answer to our opening question is clear. Yes, someone trusted with a wife's love and safety can betray that trust in the most heinous way imaginable. But the story of Celeste Harmon also proves that truth has a way of surfacing, no matter how deeply it's buried, and that justice, while sometimes delayed, will ultimately prevail. The trial of Garrett Harmon is scheduled to begin later this year. As of the writing of this story, he remains in custody awaiting his day in court, where a jury will ultimately decide whether he is guilty of murdering the mother of his children, the woman who trusted him most in the world.